I'm Polly, and I know Lauren and Sherry, and of course I know Melissa. So welcome to Wood Glen. Wood Glen has been here almost 70 years now, and we've always been a local nonprofit senior living community. So really, we're the first one that opened in Santa Barbara, the first senior living community that opened in town, 1957. And we're kind of a really unique community, both because we're nonprofit and we're local. We're not under, a bigger corporation or anything, and because of our size too, I think, and just the setting. If you want to tour at the end, we can certainly do that. You'll see there's a lot more. Like, this is just the kind of scratching the surface of the property here, but we have gorgeous gardens, really homey community, and 63 private units. So it's a fairly intimate community overall. And I think that's all I have to say. I'm the sales director, so I do take the inquiries, give tours, and coordinate move-ins. Right now we have a wait list, actually, probably about 4 to 6 months in length at the moment, which can change any time. So, if you're interested, just stay in touch with me. But yeah, happy to show you around after the seminar today, if you wish.
All right, thank you so much, Holly. And it's wonderful to be here. I always appreciate the hospitality here at Wood Glen Senior Living. It's always next level. So thank you for the hospitality. So my name is Melissa Tierney. I am one of your keynote speakers. The other one just parked, like I said. There he is. So the information you are about to hear is intended to empower you to discover something new about your situation. It may feel at times like you're drinking from a fire hose. Please save your questions for Q&A during lunch. You're certainly welcome to ask me to clarify something, but there's paper in front of you to take notes. I always have time to address situational questions in a one-on-one setting, and highly recommend that you schedule yours with me at the end of my part of the presentation. So you're going to hear from me, and I'll get to this in a little bit. My colleague Sam Sosa, who just walked in the door. We've known each other for a few years now. What I like about his background is he went to law school and has his Juris Doctorate in estate planning. So when we started talking about the areas in which we practice and how we serve people who are 60 years and older, the conversation just kept evolving, and I have asked him to present in these seminars with me ever since, because he offers a unique blend of knowledge and financial acumen to his strategic advice. So you'll hear from him after you hear from me. Quick background on me: I'm a realtor. I'm a local realtor here in Santa Barbara. I have sold all over the state of California. I am a certified real estate planner. It is a designation that I earned within the Keller Williams community. My whole focus is helping families navigate that intersection of real estate, aging, legacy planning, and wealth strategy. So in my world, real estate is not just a transaction. It is one of the biggest financial decisions a family will make. And my role, which I take very seriously, is to help people navigate that decision strategically and not reactively. So here's a picture of my contact information. You are welcome to take a picture of it and save it for future use. These are just some of the things that I do around town. One of the things that I'm most proud of is that I founded a local association called the Senior Industry Network Association. And we have quite a few people in this room who are members of it, and we're proud to partner with them to put on community events that educate the public about resources available to support their senior loved ones, because we as a cohort believe that there aren't enough out there, and we partner, we combine forces to educate and empower. And our next event is actually June 10th, and I'll talk about that in just a little bit. You can also find me coaching my son's swim team at the YMCA. In fact, they have their championship meet this weekend, so it's a very busy, very busy time for us as we wrap that up. You can also find me, and actually Sam, we swim reef and run Thursday nights. On Thursday nights, they put the buoys out in the ocean, and a whole bunch of crazy people run out and swim around them.
It's crazy.
Yes, it is. But I'm there, and so is Sam. And the first one is, what, next week?
Next Thursday.
Next Thursday, yeah. So, all right. So we're going to just dive right in. When I talk to people, there are a lot of things that come up. I'm sure you can imagine just the sheer quantity of rabbit holes that we can get into. And so the question isn't if a transition will happen. The question is, are you prepared when and if it happens? So one thing that I asked my grandmother when we found ourselves in this situation with her, she was kind of stuck. And we said to her, this is what moved the needle with her. I said, Grandma, what is your vision for your golden years? These are your golden years. What is your vision? And she always kept saying the same thing over and over. Well, my family is everything. My family, I am with my family. I said, no. We're gonna dig into this and get a little bit more granular. And finally she said, my vision is this person and this person are, X amount of miles away. I'm attending every family barbecue. I'm attending every milestone, celebrating with the family. I'm holding my great grandbabies. At the time she had 4, now she has 6. But we had that conversation with her because, we want to be able to say, where do you want to live? How do you want to feel? But most importantly, who is making decisions? You or your circumstances? And so today is all about bridging that gap between emotional and financial decisions, because the best outcomes happen when those two are aligned and not in conflict. So we're going to talk about some key vocabulary. Actually, I'll just do the vocabulary lesson now. The senior industry has its own vocabulary. And I'm going to start right here with Wood Glen Senior Living. What do you call, if you can't remember what it's called, what do you call Wood Glen Senior Living?
It's a facility, right?
No!
Community.
It's a community. Thank you. We do not say the F word. Somewhere. We do not say the F word. We call these senior living communities or retirement communities. Let me see. Well, there are, and that's not to be construed with a skilled nursing facility. Those we call SNFs. Because people, sometimes life happens and they end up there. Thank you, Jason. And there's also people who live here. What are they called?
Residents.
They are called residents. They are not patients. Patients are at hospitals. There's no medical stuff going on here. And the last one I want to say is, sometimes our senior loved ones need a little bit more support. And so they use briefs. They don't wear diapers, babies wear diapers. So I just want to clear up that little senior industry vocabulary. Did I miss anything? Okay, well, if you think of something, let me know. As we go down this rabbit hole, we're going to demystify wills, trusts, and the probate process in some very simple English. And ultimately, we're going to touch on real estate strategies that defer capital gains taxes. And we're going to also talk about estate planning and creating a lasting legacy intentionally and on your own terms, because measured decisions matter. Planning early keeps you in control. So let me ask you something. People in the room, who manages your family taxes? A CPA, a family accountant. Who manages the family trust? A family attorney. Who manages the family money? A financial planner. We have one in the room. But who manages the family real estate? Especially if there's more than one property in the trust. See, that's where I come in. That's where a real estate planner like me comes in, because this is very interesting. Most families, real estate is their largest asset. So if you have a team around you to help you with everything else except the asset that matters the most, that's kind of a disconnect, is it not? So my role is to bring real estate into that conversation and working alongside and within what I call the power team of 4, so that decisions are aligned and not made in isolation. I mean, how many times do we find ourselves going to meet with an attorney, and then you go to your CPA and you tell them, oh, I think my attorney said something like this. People tend to operate very siloed. That's not the most efficient use of our power team of 4. So my job is to have these conversations with everybody at the same table. And the reason is because you're seeing a lot of statistics like this in the headlines right now. Quick show of hands, how many of your parents or grandparents own real estate? Now keep your hand up if you know exactly what happens to those properties when they're gone. Okay, so that gap right there that we just addressed, the gap in the room, that is what's making headlines right now, and it's called the silver tsunami. And over the next 15 years, $40 trillion are going to transfer between generations, which is making headlines and saying, you know, largest wealth transfer in American history. But most of that wealth is not sitting in stocks, it's in real estate. And in fact, 70% of American wealth is tied to property. Meanwhile, 8,000 seniors per day are making housing transitions. It's 16 families every minute making emotional, financial, and often irreversible decisions. And most people don't have the right advisor guiding them. This isn't a future trend, it's actually happening. So the real question is, will families navigate these decisions alone, or will somebody in that room be equipped to help them to protect the wealth that's inside those properties? Because here's a hard truth, most family disputes after a parent passes, they're not about money. They're about real estate, because cash can be divided, but you cannot physically cut a house in half and say, here you go, here you go. That's not how it works. You're gonna have one child who wants to sell, one who wants to keep it, and one sees it as a home, another sees it as income. And when there's no clear plan, even when the trust says divide everything equally, that's not a strategy. That's the difference between reacting after a crisis and planning before one. So my role is to help families think these things through before emotions, urgency, and conflict take over. Because the right property decision starts with the right questions. And after years of sitting at the table with a lot of older investors and their families, I've learned a few very simple things. People want more income, less burden, or a meaningful legacy. That's it. And once you know which path they're on, it changes that conversation completely. So some owners are sitting on multi-million-dollar assets, generating returns that they've never actually measured. Others are exhausted, and Sam and I talk to a lot of these tired landlords, we call them. They're tired of getting calls from tenants. They're tired of repairs. They're tired of plumbing bills. Some don't need the income at all. Some simply want to transfer their wealth intentionally while preserving family harmony. But the problem here is most people don't get asked the right questions. Example, many realtors will say, are you ready to sell? That's not the right question. The right question, you may want to write this down, is this asset truly serving you, or are you serving it? If this property disappeared tomorrow and became cash, would you buy it again? Do you own this because it's performing, or because you've always owned it? Maybe the property is creating income, but more stress. If nothing changes, what does this situation look like 5 years from now? Because clarity changes everything. I'm here to help families ask better questions before life forces those decisions, because real power is not in property, it's in the clarity to know what the property should be doing next. So this is why I started my easy button concept. I had a trustee who lived in Colorado call me. They got the call that their great aunt here in Santa Barbara, who had no next of kin, could not go home. And so these out-of-state trustees had to downsize their loved one into a community that they didn't know where she should go. And then they had to figure out what to do with the house. And so I said, you're in good hands, I've got you. But the questions that often come my way when this happens, usually the next questions are, do we need a moving company? And when do we need to come out and unpack and pack and then unpack again? First of all, you don't do that. When you're downsizing a senior loved one, you need to hire a senior move manager. That's senior move manager. And one who is a member of the National Association of Senior Move Managers, always referred to as NASM. One of those NASM members wrote a book called How to Move Your Parents and Still Be on Speaking Terms. And the purpose of this is you hire a senior move manager. They know to go into somebody's home, grab the favorite pillow, favorite blanket, favorite, most important pictures, most important documents, take those things and move them into a new space, different floor plan, different footprint, different all the things, and make this new space look as akin to their original home as they can. They will do that, and everything else they make piles. So when my trustees eventually made it into Santa Barbara, my trustees just looked at different piles and said yes or no to the piles. Then my senior move manager, they hired the moving company then, and the moving company did the rest. That's a great easy button, in my opinion. So we don't have to really ask the questions of who's carrying the burden right now for this loved one, because oftentimes it's either the aging parent, the adult child, or a trustee who suddenly got a job they didn't ask for, because transitions don't fail because families lack good intentions. They fail because no one has a clear plan, but how can you make a clear plan if you don't know the questions you're supposed to be asking? So some of the questions that I come in and I ask are, how do we remove friction from one of life's most emotional transitions? And that's why this is called the easy button, is because I have the resources and the tools to reduce stress, protect the family, and create clarity in the middle of what otherwise can feel like chaos. So the conclusion of all this is the senior niche is very involved. There are a lot of nuances, and there are a lot of people in town who say that they can downsize. You don't want to hire somebody who says they can downsize. You want to hire somebody who does downsizing. There's a difference, and the differences are in the details, and they make life very simple. So, has anybody in this room heard the term sandwich generation? Sandwich generation? Okay. So, it's the generation caught in the middle. We are raising kids while also caring for aging parents. And for many in this room, that's not theory, that's just every Tuesday. So if you look at the numbers, 70% of adults over the age of 65 will need some form of care and some kind of long-term care. 10,000 Americans in America turn 65 every day. 1 in 4 adults will actually, unfortunately, experience a fall, and over 800,000 will be hospitalized because of it. So I'm going to ask a better question. Are we planning for aging, or are we waiting for a crisis to make the decisions for us? Because that's what most families do. They wait for the fall, they wait for the ER visit, the diagnosis, the phone call, and then suddenly everybody is making these decisions under pressure. And then other questions come to the surface, like, should we sell the house? Here's a better question. What does mom actually want life to look like? And then the follow-up question to that is the home supporting her independence, or is it quietly becoming the biggest risk to her independence? The next question is, if nothing changes, what happens in the next 12 to 24 months? Who becomes responsible when something goes wrong? Some people will raise their hand and say, well, my daughter, I'm just going to move in with my daughter. And my follow-up to that is, does she know that? Is she aware? Because aging in place sounds ideal. Everybody wants to do that until the place no longer supports the aging. Stairs become dangerous, bathrooms become hazardous, isolation increases, caregiver burnout builds. The best question, I think, is to ask, what would life look like if safety, support, community, and dignity were all built in? Because sometimes moving isn't losing independence, sometimes it's preserving it. And this is the conversation that we want to have. It's about how to live. So here are some things that I've learned. People don't age into chaos overnight. They age their one avoided conversation at a time, because there are really only two ways people move through life, intentionally or reactively. And the difference is control. 71% of older adults, like I said, will need some form of care in their lifetime. So the question isn't if life changes, it's when. So, an example, what happens if something goes wrong? Instead of saying that, here's a better question. What would life look like if everything went right? So let me ask, what does independence actually mean to your senior loved one? Is staying in this home helping you live the life you want, or is it limiting it? If a health event took place tomorrow, would your family know the plan? Because here's what happens when there is no plan. Fall, hospitalization, diagnosis, and now you have to make decisions under pressure. Your options shrink, your costs rise, and emotions take over. Crisis doesn't create clarity, it creates chaos. And there's a big difference between aging in place and isolating in place. Is that independence, or is it fear disguised as familiarity? So, other questions about that. What are we trying to preserve here? The house or quality of life? What would need to be true for aging in place, aging at home, to actually work? Would it be better to have a plan and never need one, or need a plan and not have one? I'm asking the room.
I just think it's better to have something you don't need.
Thank you. Measured decisions matter. And can we all agree that clarity here is the ultimate superpower? Yes. So then the next question becomes, well, where do I age? Like I mentioned with my grandmother, it was a very emotional decision. For example, I need to be close to my kids, or maybe my kids should move in with me. But the logical decisions are going to be, I'm done with stairs, I can no longer vacuum, I can't do this, or this is becoming more of a challenge. All of those are valid. But it always comes back to, people will need care at some point in their life. So if life changes, where would you go? Because if we don't ask that question proactively, life may answer it for us reactively. And so in order to answer those questions, we need to understand that activities of daily living, herein referred to as ADLs, are going to be the foundation of that conversation. While this list looks really simple, this is where families start to notice change. And then it's not usually going to be dramatic. It's not going to announce itself. It's going to be very subtle. Maybe mom starts wearing the same outfit a few days in a row. Dad starts avoiding the stairs. Somebody stops showering regularly. The refrigerator is full, but somehow the food is not getting eaten. Getting up from a chair suddenly takes effort, or there's quite a conversation about an accident that no one wants to talk about. And these are the moments that matter because they tend to escalate over time. The question isn't, can somebody survive in their current environment? It's, are they thriving in the current environment? Another question to ask ourselves as we observe our senior loved ones: what are we observing and not assuming? Has something changed, or are we simply getting used to change? If this thing becomes incrementally harder over the next 6 to 12 months, what would happen? What could possibly happen? Here's what families often do, is they normalize decline. They adjust, they work around it, they minimize it until one day a small issue becomes a crisis. But when you recognize these signs early, you gain something incredibly valuable, and that's time. You get time to make thoughtful decisions, explore options, time to preserve independence and dignity, because the goal is not to wait until someone can't do something. The goal is to recognize when, where, and how life could be easier, safer, and better before it has to be, and all doing so without Madame Leota's crystal ball. So here's a question most families don't ask early enough. How much does it cost to keep someone safe at home? And actually, we have an expert on this in the room. Lauren, would you mind talking about this?
Of course, yeah, thank you. Hi everybody, my name is Lauren, and I actually am the liaison for a home care company called The Key. And just as Melissa was saying, so the average cost for home care right now is anywhere from $35 up to $75 an hour. Home health, which includes some type of skilled nursing, is going to be just close to doubling that.
That's also, it requires a prescription.
Exactly, we do, yeah, if you need home health, you have to have doctor's orders. There has to be just a lot more paperwork involved, certainly. And I think the big things that maybe a lot of people don't understand is, well, a couple of things. We're not going to be like an emergency service. So unfortunately, when we get the call asking about home care, they probably needed it 6 months ago. But just as Melissa was saying, something happened, someone had a fall, there was a hospitalization, and most home care companies like mine are not going to be able to start up right away. It's just not realistic. And then what Melissa put down at the bottom is there is, at now, for most of the agencies here in town, there is a minimum. I know for The Key, we ask for a 4-hour minimum, and then ideally a minimum of 3 shifts per week. And I think it is an issue we run into a lot because a lot of our clients want to start off very small and kind of work their way into a bigger schedule, but in reality, we have a very hard time staffing the smaller shifts. It's a caregiver shortage all around right now. And so, yeah, that's.
But one of the good things about going with an agency is, and some people will hire somebody that they know and pay them out of pocket, which is fine, but what happens when that person gets sick? What happens when that person's child gets sick and they have a disruption in their life, and then that disrupts the senior loved one's life? Having an agency where they have backups in place is a huge advantage.
Definitely.
So, yeah, thank you for that. My questions when people start introducing care into the equation is, how long is this going to be sustainable? What asset is funding this care? What happens if care needs increase? And are we protecting quality of life, or are we protecting a house? Because like I said 2 slides ago, clarity is the ultimate superpower. Now, the Family Service Agency has a full list of communities in Santa Barbara that are RCFEs, Registered Community for the Elderly, in Santa Barbara County. It's a 13-page report of RCFEs from Carpinteria up to Goleta. What I want to draw your attention to are a few things. One is some of these communities are going to have a buy-in. Wood Glen Senior Living does not have a buy-in. Wood Glen Senior Living is going to be under the flexible lease month to month. And then there's going to be, some of these are going to be life care or life plan, meaning that they intend to keep someone there for their entire life. And they have, like I said, the buy-ins, but their monthly payment structures are going to be not just high, but they're planning on caring for a senior loved one for the remainder of their life. So it's going to be a very different type of monetary arrangement altogether. Every contract is completely customized, and it starts with a physician's report, the 602A, and it's a very involved process. So my question here is, this is a complicated decision. Wait lists aside, this is a very financially complex decision. Do we as a family want to be making this decision when a crisis has happened? When I had the trustees call me and say, our great aunt needs to go somewhere now, I said, oh boy, now? Look at these wait lists. We found her a place at Grand Vita. She went into Grand Vita. They had one assisted living studio available. But my clients, the trustees who were out of state, had to really get their hands around what this is going to cost, how it's going to be paid for, and then there's the concept of paperwork, which is a category in and of itself. So anyway, I can send this to you if you want. I know that the print is very small, and this is only a handful of communities here in town. I can talk at length about each and every one because they're very different. But every conversation always boils down to one question, and this is the question I get asked the most. What do we do with the house? And my answer to that is, let's think strategically first. This is where your power team of 4 comes into play, because before anybody makes any decisions, there are better questions that need to be asked. Like, do you understand your cost basis? Is the property held in a trust? If you sold today, are you aware of what your capital gains exposure would be? And if yes, well, how do you feel about writing that check to the government? So I'm less interested in the property, but more interested knowing what that property is going to do for not just somebody's lifetime, but what's in the best interest of the beneficiaries of the trust. So the real question then becomes, what does the life you want actually cost? Do you need this property to generate income, or are you simply holding it because you always have? Sometimes the answer isn't sell, and it's actually strategy. What does strategy look like? Well, here's the strategy for you. Let's say you own one home here in Santa Barbara, and if you sell it today, you'll probably get $3 or $4 million for it. Well, maybe you rent it out for 2 tax seasons, and you take out a home equity line of credit, and you buy yourself something that is a little bit more simple. But if you rent out that primary residence for 2 tax seasons, you're effectively turning it into a rental property. There are a lot of rabbit holes that we go down, but what I like to ask is, what could life look like if your real estate was aligned with your goals instead of just sitting there? And in some cases, sitting there vacant. Because, and we've all agreed on this, it's better to have a plan and not need it than to need a plan and not have one. So, question, who has children? Who in the room has children? So, I can tell you my 2 children are not alike. Raquel, are your children similar?
No.
Really? They don't have the same personalities, the same financial habits, the same priorities. They're not in the same phase of life.
Not at all.
Not at all? Huh. So then why is it that when people put together a trust, they say split everything equally? because equal is not always equitable. And this isn't theoretical, this is a very personal thing for me. One of the most meaningful questions I have asked families is, what if you could bless your children while you're still here to see it? You know, the market has changed and nearly 80% of baby boomers own homes. Less than 40% of adults under 35 do. The average age of a first-time home buyer now, nationwide, is 40 years old. People my age are buying homes for the first time because the market changed. So I ask different questions. What is this real estate meant to do for your family? And by the way, does every child in your family want the same thing? Do they need income? Do they need housing? Maybe it's opportunity. So my suggestion is, instead of, maybe we don't ask who gets the house when I die, it's how do we intentionally use this asset to create opportunity, clarity, and family harmony? Because when inheritance is left undefined, families tend to fight. And statistically speaking, over 70% of them do. So one of the things that I want to talk about that people don't understand, cost basis. It's not like they have a class in high school that's required taking where they teach this stuff. So I hear people say a lot, I want my children to be able to afford to live in Santa Barbara, so I'm going to add them to the title of my house. And my response to that is, if you love your children, do not do that. Do not put them on the title of your home unless your family attorney is suggesting otherwise. Then leave me out of that conversation. So let me walk you through these two scenarios. In this scenario, we have a carryover and cost basis. So let's say mom bought her home at $500,000. Mom transfers the home to her child while she's still alive. Well, child gets the house at the $500,000 cost basis. So let's say child's job takes them elsewhere and they now have to sell it and the home has appreciated to $1 million. That's $500,000 of gain that this child is now going to be taxed on. And in the state of California, we have the highest capital gains taxes in the nation. We're number one. We're at 14%, right? 14%-ish, yeah. Total with, and I have a slide that delineates the math. I mean, you're looking at a lot that can be chipped away at that. So this is a situation that we don't want. What we do want is a situation where, let's say, you get a step up in cost basis. Mom purchased her home for $500,000. Mom passes away. The home is in a trust. And at the time of passing, the home is appraised at $1 million fair market value. This is now the new cost basis for the beneficiaries of the trust. So if they sell this $1 million home for $1 million, there's no capital gains taxes. So, you know, there could be a lot of other questions that go into there, but what I'm ultimately going to ask is, what are you trying to accomplish here? Maybe we can gift the asset. I mean, we can do a lot of different things. Good intentions are not a plan. And some of the costliest mistakes are made by very loving people. So I just want to make sure we are all on the same page with where we stand on understanding cost basis. Once we understand that, we're going to go down the wills, trusts, and probate rabbit hole. Very logical rabbit hole. I want to determine if the home is protected from probate court. Now, who here has a will? Who here has a trust? So by process, just general process, A will has to go through probate court. That's just the process. However, a trust completely bypasses probate court altogether. If something happens, God forbid, the last thing families want is to end up for an estate to get tied up in probate court because it's public. The information, it becomes public. Time consuming means you're paying a lawyer you're paying a lawyer to maintain that, and it gets exhausting and expensive, and it takes time. So a trust, at its most basic level, think of it as an instruction manual for people to adhere to your terms either during your lifetime and beyond. This is a very important document, and it's why I strongly believe that trust planning needs to be, it needs to stay with a qualified estate planning attorney, not a do-it-yourself legalhelp.com, because a trust can still end up in probate court for a lot of different reasons. And then there's the trustee responsibilities. Do we know in the room the difference between a trustee and a beneficiary?
Trustees do all the work.
Trustees do all the work, there's that. But the beneficiaries are going to be the people who benefit from the trust, essentially. And the role of a trustee, actually, it's a job, essentially. It carries a lot of accountability, which is why in many situations I highly recommend families to consider hiring a licensed private fiduciary instead of placing that burden entirely on a family member. So once we determine how the estate is protected, then we can begin making some strategic recommendations around the real estate and the types of property or properties that we're working with. Now, this is a list of the 21 responsibilities of a trustee. I can email this to you. It's very small print, but this is a full-time job. And I know a lot of parents tend to assign the role of trustee to one of their kids that they deem the most responsible, most closest, a lot of different things. But they designate the role of the trustee to one of their kids. And my question to them is, if the trustee is suddenly doing their job now, it means you have passed. Do you really want them to take on this new full-time job while they're grieving the loss of their parents? That's why, again, I recommend speaking to a licensed private fiduciary. There are many in town that I work with that are very efficient and savvy and just wonderful human beings. So the reason I ask, just kind of going into more strategic thinking for the home, the reason I ask if it's possible to rent out the family home is because when people sell their primary residence, they typically qualify for a government credit on the gain of the equity in their home. So if it's one person on title, they qualify for up to $250,000. If there's two people on title, it's up to $500,000. And upon selling the home, which in Santa Barbara it's going to be upwards of $2 million, this doesn't do a whole lot in terms of reducing capital gains taxes. It just doesn't. So that's why I say, does it make sense to use your equity and buy something else and rent this out? Because if you can convert it into a rental property, then we can do a completely different strategy. But when we do calculate capital gains taxes on the property, the primary residence, this is the form that I use, and I take it with me to every appointment that I go on. And we look at what that liability would be. Now, when it comes to actual investment properties, did you know 1 out of every 3 properties in the United States is actually a rental that's owned and managed by somebody over the age of 62. We have a lot of rentals, and a lot of those people are, we call them the accidental investors because they inherited the rental property from someone somewhere. And the question is, do they have a CPA that they're working with on the depreciation, and then just really understanding what that capital gains liability would be in the event of selling the investment property. Now, when it comes to looking at investment properties, one of the tools that I use to say, well, maybe we can use the rental income from this rental property to offset costs of care. And this is where I'm going to look at what's the gross rent minus expenses. The other thing that's not on this, a lot of people who manage their own properties, they don't pay themselves a property management fee, and they don't have another section on here for reserves in the event that repairs need to be done. But this is what I'm going to look at to really help determine what the best course of action is in terms of how this rental is performing and what we can do with the income. So once we determine where the property or properties are at financially, the way to defer paying capital gains taxes is to do what's called a 1031 exchange. My question to a lot of investors, if you can avoid paying taxes on the sale of your investment property, would you? Most of the time they say yes. And it's called a 1031 exchange because this is quite literally IRS code 1031. And the reason the reason why it's so important to understand what a 1031 does is to first understand the math. Let's say I have $1 million residence. We sell it for $1 million, net proceeds. Well, they're paying capital gains taxes on it. And here's how this computes. Now, after selling the $1 million residence, we have $707,500 in our bank account ready to use. Many people find themselves in the situation where they have to eat the capital gains taxes because they need the liquidity to supply for care, to lots of things. But let's say we use my suggestion from earlier. Big house, a lot of value. We buy something else, we rent it. We convert it to a rental. Well, we're done renting it. So let's say we sell it for $1 million. We do not pay capital gains taxes because we're using a 1031 exchange. Now we have $1 million to reinvest. This does not go in the bank account. And it's important to know the distinction. This is money ready to run the credit card on. This is money that you reinvest in something else. Oops. You reinvest it in another type of property that the IRS deems to be like kind. And you can sell a condo, buy a theater. You can sell a single family home, buy a vacant land or a shopping center. But what I find a lot of tired landlords end up doing, and this has become a very widely known thing among investors but not published, they go into what's called a Delaware statutory trust, which is going to be a professional trust that wraps around a portfolio of properties that are professionally managed and generate income, because people are not ready to exit real estate because they need the income. So transacting the rental property by way of a 1031 exchange and going into a Delaware statutory trust with a financial advisor who knows these instruments well is a very, very lucrative strategy. And for estate planning purposes, it's also very good because if you have one or more children, if something were to happen to the senior loved one, then that instrument gets passed down and they get a step up in value. Sam's gonna talk about all this, I'm gonna leave that to him.
Quick
But-
question though, how many people here in this room are landlords?
Do we have any landlords in the room? Raquel? Jason says not yet.
I'm not for it yet, so.
Not yet.
Got a couple more years.
Yeah, so the other reason why we go this route is because in a 1031 exchange, you have 45 days to find your replacement property, and then you have 180 to close on it. So timing can be stressful. And when you go the route of a Delaware statutory trust, timing is not an issue. We can usually get these done in a matter of a week or so. So just wrapping all that up, there are a lot of different strategies here that we can deploy for the sake of real estate planning. But it's critical to understand that the sale of a home is a taxable event, but utilizing a smart strategy allows for not just wins in the interim, but down the road in terms of building a legacy. Here are some of the strategies that I've seen just in the last year. This is an out-of-state rental that some local friends of mine, they had a little bit of cash, but they didn't have enough to invest here in Santa Barbara, so they invested out of state using a DSCR loan. So they used their cash as the down payment, but a DSCR loan is a debt service coverage ratio loan. And it only factors in the income producing potential of an investment property. You don't need to submit credit and do a full-blown application like you would for other loans. This DSCR loan is just income potential for the property. And we secured them a midterm rental out of state that had an 8% cap rate, which 8% is not something we see here locally. We just don't. This is a client of mine and Sam's. They had a duplex. They were tired of being landlords. They did have, help nearby, but they were managing the property themselves. They were tired of taking calls, bottom line. So we sold this. We had multiple offers on it, but we did a 1031 exchange and we deferred about $170,000 in capital gains taxes.
Something like that.
Something like that. But we put them in a Delaware statutory trust and they are getting income every month from it. So that's what I have for you today.